welcome back to the channel. Today, we are getting this car ready for its first startup. Now don't get too excited. In today's episode, we are physically unable to get our first startup on this car as we are still waiting on our fuel rails, our downpipe, and our intake to show up. The goal of today's episode is to button up every miscellaneous thing on this car so when those parts do show up, it's a quick bolt on and we are able to get this thing started. Now it's been a few days since I've uploaded a video for you guys and I do apologize. That doesn't mean I haven't been working on this car though. As you guys may see, there are a few things added. I did film videos on all of this, but unfortunately the videos were not what I wanted, so I did end up scrapping them. But if you take a look here, our engine bay is practically complete with the exception of our alternator and small stuff like that. But in the back corner here, we have our IAG AOS fully installed, plumbed up. We have our power steering put on with our new braided high pressure feed line, as the stock one is a huge pain to work with this hard inlet. And we also have our fuel lines all plumbed up and in place, so when those fuel rails come, we just screw those on. But that brings us into today's video and what we need to get buttoned up with this car. In previous videos, we've had this car torn apart. We went ahead and replaced both our front and rear subframe. We've had the diff out, the axles out, and in doing so, we lost quite a bit of fluid. So what we need to do today is go through this car, drain all of the fluid, the rear diff, the transmission, the front diff, top all of this off with some new fluid. Now when I bought this car, I have absolutely no idea how many miles all of these old fluids have. So even if I didn't lose some of this fluid in the process of changing a lot of these components that I did, it is a smart idea to go through, do a complete fluid flush, and put some new fluid in. Now with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get this car up in the air. And now that we have the car up on all fours, we need to go ahead and remove all of the wheels. Now with all of the wheels removed, we can start our bleeding process. Now before we start this off, I did replace the master cylinder and the slave. So we need to go ahead and top this off with fluid and make sure it is full. And for that, we are going to be using .3. All right, now that we have the reservoirs topped off with fluid, we can now start bleeding. But here comes the fun part. I'm a one-man team. It is just me, and most people know it is easier if you have two people to do this. Because normally you would have one person sitting here, cracking the bleeder, closing it, opening it, and closing it, while someone is inside the car compressing and decompressing the brake pedal. So our solution for this is I went to Harbor Freight and picked up a kit that should make this a one-man show. Now, truthfully, I have no idea how this works, so I'm gonna sit you guys down, look at the instructions, and go from there. Now, thankfully, unlike most manuals, this one is very easy to read, and the instructions are actually quite simple. We filled up the fill bottle to the fill line, but it also comes with 4 different fittings. We have to find the one that fits into our master cylinder, and then that is what threads this on. And there we go. We found the fitting that fits into our master cylinder right here. And then all we have to do is thread this bottle into the insert. And then it should look something just like this. And now that this is secure on here, we can go ahead and open up the valve. All right, so now that we have everything hooked up, I did not realize this. We are utilizing an air compressor and it's going to go on to the back of the gun, and that is what's gonna create vacuum inside of here. Now, believe it or not, there is actually a process in which you need to bleed your brakes. And depending on where this is located in your car, that is going to tell you where to start bleeding. Now, what you wanna do is start in the furthest point possible, whatever brake line is the longest to get up into that pump. That is because you want to try to get all of the air out with the longest line possible first, and then make your way up to the closest line, like our passenger front would be. Now I'm not gonna hook up the air compressor to the gun yet because it's gonna be quite loud, but I'll show you guys what you need to do. You're gonna need to pop off the cap on your bleeder, if I can grab it. And once that cap is off, you're going to wanna grab the line to the bottle and put that fitting on. So what I'm gonna do now is attach the air compressor line to the back of the gun, hold the trigger, build pressure. Once pressure is built up in the bottle, I then am going to crack this bleeder line and then hold the trigger until all of the air is out of it, essentially. Excuse the airline leak that we have going on here, but this tool is the coolest thing I probably have ever bought in. But I don't want to bore you guys doing all four sides. I just wanted to show you guys one side here so you can see how it is done. Now, as we let the brakes essentially bleed themselves, there's one thing I need to do under the car that is very, very crucial. Now, as you guys know, I had this whole drivetrain taken apart and I took out the drive shaft. When I reinstalled the drive shaft, I did not Loctite the bolts together. And the last thing I want is for a drive shaft to say hello to me inside of the cabin. So I'm gonna go ahead and squeeze under the car here and get those bolts Loctited up. This system I'm using to bleed the brakes is taking so long, and really the other sides went really quickly besides this front bleeder line. I don't know what's going on, but this side is taking forever. And I don't want to sit here just waiting for that to bleed out. So while that's bleeding out, we're gonna go ahead and tackle all of the fluids. Like I've mentioned, we are going to be doing a fluid flush. We are going to be draining the rear diff, the front diff, and the transmission. Now for the transmission, we are going to be using the BBR Redline cocktail. This is a cocktail I've put in every single one of my Subarus. Josh does the same. And that consists of 3 Redline lightweight shot proofs, along with 175/90. And then the rear diff calls for 1.1 quart of 75/90. Now the rear diff is very simple and straightforward. You're going to need a 30 mil socket, along with a 1/2 inch breaker bar, wrench, whatever you have. Right here is going to be your drain bolt, so that is what the 1/2 inch breaker bar or whatever you have is going to be used for. And then right where the sensor is, this 30 mil socket, this is where your fill hole is. So let's go ahead, grab an oil bucket and get this thing drained. Now, if your diff has been seasoned well, it might be quite difficult to get that off, and you wanna make sure you don't strip or break anything, so carefully remove it. But as you can see here, I am using my foot and we were able to break it loose. And now that we have drained all of the fluid out of the rear diff, we are now going to put back in the drain bolt and then take out the fill port. We can now fill this thing up with some fresh fluid. And how we're gonna do this is using this multi-use transfer pump. Now, how we're gonna do this is we are going to put the in outlet on the pump into our oil, and then the outlet we are going to put into the drain hole, into the fill hole, my apologies. And we are going to pump the fluid until we start seeing fluid come out of here. That is when we know it's full and we can go ahead and put the fill plug back in. And there we go, we have the rear diff completed now, topped off with some brand new Redline 75/90. And a quick little inspection of the old gear oil. This looks flawless. So it looks like our rear diff is good. Now we make our way up to the transmission and front diff. Now, a common mistake I see a lot of people do when flushing their transmission is they only do one of the two. There's two drain bolts, and I'll show you guys here in a second. There's one for your diff and transmission. And if you take a look here, right on the pan, this is going to be drain bolt number 1. But also right next to the subframe is going to be a T70, a torque 70 bit that you also need to drain as well. Normally people do one or the other, never both. And there we go. Now we have all of the fluids drained. We now need to go ahead and fill this thing back up, except the fill plug on the side of the transmission is feeling a little sketchy and I don't want to strip or break anything. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and fill this from the dipstick, which is located right there. And for filling this, like I mentioned, we are going to be using the BBR cocktail, which I'll have linked down below if you guys want to run this for your STI or WRX transmission. 3 lightweight shot proofs topped with a 75/90. And my camera decided not to record, so you guys missed the filling up with the 4 quarts of Redline, but we have our front trans and diff topped off. Now we can grab our dipstick here. And there she goes. And there is nothing concerning with our fluids in the front, so that is a good sign. Looks like we have some healthy components here. I've gotten pretty lazy having to recycle 5 gallons of oil every time I use it, so I decided to start filling up a 50 gallon E85 drum. It's really nice not having to make a ton of oil and fluid recycling runs now that I'm using this, except I have a feeling when this gets full, this is going to be a giant pain to dispose of. But boys, there we go. We are one step closer to getting this thing on the road. All the fluids are topped off. Everything is good. So when those 3 parts show up, my fuel rails, downpipe, and intake, we are able to start her up. But thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Make sure you guys are subscribed. And if you guys liked today's video, hit that like button to stay tuned on all of the fun stuff we have in store with this Hawkeye. Smedia, you're getting gapped.